Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening. Welcome to a special presentation of Lives and Wines by, of course, African American Shakespeare Company, presenting Ishmael Reed, a slave who loved Caviar. But before we get into that, I would like to make a couple announcements. My name is Dallas Thomas. I am the Director of Education and Engagement here at African American Shakespeare Company. So I just wanted to talk to you guys about some of our programming that we have coming up this season. We currently are doing live play reads. So this is the second one. We opened up last spring with, what was it called? Supper during our Pride event. Yes. And then this is our second one, and we keep going to be doing one again in the spring. Then moving forward, we have Death of a Salesman that will start rehearsals here shortly, and then tickets are already on sale. And then our subscription. If you are not a subscriber and you love these events, then come and join the team. And so you can stay updated on all the information. And then yes. So again, my name is Dallas Thomas. You can meet with me after the show and I can tell you more about our programming, even youth programming if we have little ones. And then with further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our artistic director, Peter Callender.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. My gosh, I appreciate you guys being here. My name is Peter Callender. I'm the artistic director of the African American Shakespeare Company, going on 16 years as artistic director. So they haven't found the truth yet. I hope it isn't. Oh, shucks, she's right there. It is my pleasure to have you here for this reading of Ishmael Reed's The Slave Who Loved Caviar, an investigative story on the life and relationship of Jean-Michel Basquiat and Andy Warhol. How many of you have heard of Jean-Michel Basquiat? 1, 2, 3, 4. I know, 4, right? This is why the play is so important, right? It is an theatrical investigative story. So you're not going to find, some huge dramatic moments. It is an investigative story about the death of Jean-Michel Basquiat, who died at age 27, right? And the story is still uncertain as to how he died. Was it drugs? Was it self-inflicted? How did he die? So what our friend and what my friend and colleague Ishmael Reed has done has put together an investigative look at what happened to this man's life. And it's a brilliant life, where when he was in his teens and doing his work, his art was just all over the place. He drew on refrigerators, on tissue paper, whatever he could find. Now his art is going for $104 million, right? So what happened in between, and how did he become all this? This is what our brother Ishmael Reed has put together. So African American Shakespeare Company is going on its 30th anniversary. Thank you. 30 years in the Bay Area. And could you just stand up for a second? Sherry Young is our founder and executive director.
I started when I was 10.
She started when she was 10. Oh, she's so funny. But what she did was offer an opportunity for young actors to find their heart, to find their roots in theater. And it's absolutely amazing what she has done and her team has done over the past 30 years. So we will be celebrating our 30th anniversary next season. This coming season, our season will be Death of a Salesman. I will play Willie Loman. Followed by Cinderella, directed by the incomparable Sherry Young. Death of a Salesman will be directed by Ted Lange. Who knows who Ted Lange is? I think old school, right? Old school. Isaac, right? As a good friend of mine, and he's here to direct for us. I'm more than thrilled. Sherry Young will direct Cinderella. Nataki Garrett, formerly of the Oakland Shakespeare Festival, will be directing Dominique Morisseau's Pipeline, which is our 3rd show. And then a dear friend of mine and an amazing director, Giulio Peroni, will direct The Merchant of Venice, which will be our final show this season. So we're putting together a wonderful 30th anniversary show for you. Please keep an eye out for that. And now, actors, places please. I would love for you to sit back or lean forward, engage, listen, form your own opinions, form your thoughts, form your ideas. Listen to this piece as if you are finding out about Jean-Michel Basquiat for the very first time. Form your own opinions. Listen to how these actors and these characters formulate these ideas and theories about the life and times of Jean-Michel Basquiat. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I'd like to present Ishmael Reed's The Slave Who Loved Caviar. Thank you so much. Actors, thank you. Please turn off your cell phones. Thank you.
The Slave Who Loved Caviar, a theatrical investigation into the relationship between Jean-Michel Basquiat and Andy Warhol, a play in 2 acts by Ishmael Reed. Cast of characters: Jennifer Blue, female, between 25 and 30, victim of the Baron. Mary Van Helsing, middle-aged black woman, chief of detectives, NYPD. Baron DeWitt, middle-aged man, who is also the son of Dracula. Antonio Wolfe, middle-aged man, the Baron's agent, a longtime associate of the Baron. Forensic expert, Grace. Forensic expert, Raksha. Youngblood, graffiti artist, black male, about 28. Jack Brooks, homeless black man, abstract expressionist painter, about 60 to 75. Act 1, Scene 1. Jennifer Blue is dressed in a costume of Cinderella, a Caribbean-style update on the classic Disney character.
I can't have a Halloween party with the girls tonight. No, it's not homework. Are you ready for this? Are you sitting down? I've been invited to Baron DeWitt's Halloween party, the social event of the year. Don't you remember? He came to the poetry slam at the New Yorican Poets Cafe. He says that he couldn't keep his eyes off of me. He especially complimented me on my lovely throat. He says that he wants to include me in a performance piece. Isn't that thrilling? He didn't give me any details about the piece. Just that for rehearsal, I'd have to become used to sleeping in cramped quarters during the day. For authenticity. What is my costume tonight? I'm going dressed like Cinderella in the Disney movie. Everybody is required to wear a mask. Isn't that just so intriguing? Shh. What about Ricky? Just tell Ricky that I'm studying tonight. He is so immature, while the Baron is suave and charming. He's from Europe, you know? Lived in one of those castles you see in a Viking's cruise ad. Besides, Ricky isn't really my boyfriend. We've only dated a couple of times. He's as exciting as a raisin. Look! I gotta go! Ciao!
Act 1, Scene 2. The Baron is seated in an elegant chair. He is dressed in a black tuxedo and cape with red lining. On the wall, over the fireplace, is a painting of Bridget, Mother of the Dead.
Agent Antonio Wolfe appears. A detective is outside. She wants to speak with you.
A detective? Why would a detective want to speak with me?
Want me to get rid of her?
No. That would only arouse suspicion. Send her in.
Agent Wolfe exits.
Mary Van Helsing, Chief of Detectives, enters.
And who may you be?
Mary Van Helsing, Chief of Detectives, NYPD.
And what have I done to deserve the presence of a detective?
Cut the bullshit, man. This isn't a social call. I'm going to show you some pictures. Do you recognize this girl? Her name is Jennifer Blue.
I'm sorry, Detective Van Helsing. I've never seen this girl in my life.
She was last seen at your Halloween party. Her roommate says that you invited her, that you wanted her to appear in a performance piece.
All of my guests were wearing masks. How could I tell them apart? Besides, I am always inviting young people to participate in my work, whether they be models or performers. They have to get their start somewhere.
Yeah, but you must have a guest list. Her name might appear there.
We shred those lists as soon as a particular party is over. Our guests come from the rarefied regions of New York society. They insist upon our discretion.
She was dressed like Cinderella in one of those Disney movies, according to her roommate. You must have seen her.
Antonio Wolf enters. Devin, the car is waiting to take us to see Hamilton.
Unfortunately, Detective, I have to leave. I must end this interview.
By the way, the Bavarian government said that you were delinquent in paying your property taxes on your castle. That it was overrun by rats. When they opened the door, the odor was so foul that several members of the police force fainted. They're sending investigators, and we've offered them our full cooperation.
Let them come. I have nothing to hide.
You sure? Well, if you hear anything, here's my card. Mary Van Helsing, exits.
What do you think she knows?
Somebody must have tipped her off.
She's onto something, I can tell. The way she looked at me is as though she could see right through.
That she has the gift.
I can call off an investigation if she gets too close. You know the people who attend our parties are well connected. Some of the most important players of this town. Governors, captains of social media, generals and college presidents, European royalty. They like their women real young. I have all of their names in my black book. If I go down, they go down with me.
You're the most feared man in town. Nobody has the nerve to cross you, in a manner of speaking.
Forensic Scientist Grace, Act 1, Scene 3. Those who monopolize the framing of Jean-Michel Basquiat's career might regard him as a pest, a mascot, or a primitive, or a drug-crazed, coked-up maniac. He was defamed as a street urchin, a bum, and a leech. But Basquiat was not only a painter, but a filmmaker and musician, whose life was the subject of a biopic. According to the New York art crowd, Basquiat's career was made when he began a collaboration with Andy Warhol. However, Bruno Bischofberger, an art dealer, says that in the 80s, Warhol normally sold nothing.
Not a single painting of his dollar sign show held at the Leo Castelli Gallery in 1982 was sold. The same thing happened when the show traveled to Paris.
Forensics expert Raksha. Grace, what are you reading?
Going over my notes. Detective Van Helsing wants them soon.
This is a waste of time. She's obsessed with this Jean-Michel Basquiat. His paintings are just a bunch of scribbles and faces of angry black men.
Raksha, I've been here longer than you. Chief of Detectives Van Helsing is no one to be messed with. She worked her way up through the ranks and survived every test that these pigs hurled at her. She promised Hilda Owen that she'd pursue her theory that Basquiat was a victim of foul play.
Hilda Owen? Who was that?
She was a detective back in 1980s.
A woman detective in the 1980s?
You can imagine the shit that she had to take. Her male colleagues resented her. Some refused to even work with her. There was constant harassment, jokes. The NYPD has changed since then.
Not all that much.
Look at it this way, Raksha. Now we have gay officers. The Gay Officers Action League.
Yeah, but the gay pride community doesn't recognize them. They have banned them from marching in the Pride Parade.
That's how Basquiat felt about black officers. He caricatured them. In 1981, he painted Irony of a Negro Policeman and Their Sheriff, which ridicules an officer by using distortion. But I think that it's better for some cops of color to be on the inside than on the outside looking in. They can intervene when their colleagues are over-policing.
Tell that to Carroll Holloman Horn, a Buffalo police officer. She intervened in an arrest where she said a fellow officer used a chokehold on a handcuffed suspect.
What happened to her?
The officer punched her. She was fired and she lost her pension. But this year, a judge ruled in her favor and her pension was restored. But look at all the trouble they put her through. That's what she got for working on the inside. Sometimes working on the inside of institutions that are intractable, like the police force, can lead to misery and frustration. We even get it in our jobs in forensics.
Good point. Some say that Basquiat would have survived if he had remained on the outside. Selling postcards, expressing himself by painting on walls, even a refrigerator. I think the evidence shows he's becoming part of the Warhol cult is what killed him. Though most of the writers, fans of Warhol, say that his death was self-inflicted. An argument could be made that he was an innocent lured into a death cult in which Warhol, according to the art world documentarian Emile D'Antonio, was the angel of death's apprentice. Warhol even called himself Undertaker at one point. There seems to be a consensus among pro-Warhol white critics that Basquiat was dependent upon Warhol.
Depends on who controls the story about the two, doesn't it? Story ownership has been a question throughout world history. My grandmother used to say, Yenekonjo, until the lion tells the story, the hunter will always be the hero.
Bugs and maggots are our storytellers.
I heard that.
Was Basquiat the lion and the all-white art critics establishment the hunter?
Basquiat addressed that. He said,
I think I helped Andy more than Andy helped me.
If one is familiar with the style of both, a cursory glance at the collaboration indicates that Basquiat did most of the work. Now, I'm not a fan of either, nor am I an art historian, but I can see that.
Between the two, the critics favored Warhol because Warhol was famous.
And white. Don't forget that part.
Okay, I grant you that. But another reason might be that while Basquiat was a serious painter, Warhol represented a trend that was moving away from painting. He once said that painting was dead. He concentrated on stunts, which involved brand names like creating facsimiles of Brillo boxes and passing them off as art in museums. He spent a lot of time in grocery stores. David Bowie might have made the most profound comment about Warhol's art, that as a Byzantine Greek Catholic, he was fascinated by icons. If the Byzantine was his spiritual home, the department store was his secular home. He dressed mannequins. He had the soul of a mannequin. Though he had a downtown address, he was Madison Avenue through and through. He was at heart an advertiser. He never denied that he was a commercial artist. What have you found?
Well, listen to this. Ultraviolet, the late Warhol actress, seems to agree with you. She wasn't intimate. She says,
he learned all about screens and multiples and blow-ups and colorization in his days as a commercial artist.
And listen to this. Among the icons created by Warhol was Count Dracula. He produced a film called Young Dracula. His nickname was Drella, a cross between Dracula and Cinderella. Did Warhol get the nickname Drella because after sucking energy from his followers, they became the living dead? And why Cinderella? Was it because he got turned on by the central image in the Cinderella myth, the slipper? So in the first Cinderella story, a bird drops a sandal in the presence of an Egyptian king. The king sends out his men to find the owner of the sandal. She's a slave. When she's found, she marries the king. And so the story evolves over the centuries until the sandal becomes a glass slipper. John Giorno writes of Warhol.
He had a secret reputation as a shoe fetishist. For years, he designed shoe ads for Bergdorf Goodman, I. Miller, and Bonwit Teller. There was Andy Warhol on his hands and knees, licking my Abercrombie and Fitch loafers. He wiggled his tongue around and smelled. My shoes were covered with saliva. It was a turn-on.
Oh, that's creepy. Basquiat was hanging out with this guy? This Warhol was a sick puppy. Do you think that Warhol might have masturbated when he saw Basquiat on the cover of the New York Times Magazine shoe list?
Gross. Do you have to go there?
Gross. Of all the crime scenes we've had to examine, you didn't seem squeamish when all that was left of the victim was some messy body parts. And you get offended when I use the word like masturbation.
I'm not prepared for a case like this. There's no blood, no saliva, no drinking glasses or cigarette butts with DNA traces.
Look at it this way. There's metaphorical blood. Critics say that Basquiat gave Warhol new blood. Warhol was called a leech. So dependent was he upon Basquiat. In one of his paintings, Basquiat wrote the word leech and parasite. Basquiat knew that he was being used. He was just a kid, but he knew that much.
Metaphorical blood. Grace, you always have to go egghead on me. I forgot you used to be a classics major before you got into forensics. Why'd you quit the classics?
In this age of the woke, today's students just see Greek and Roman myths as one of the many of the world's storytelling traditions. They barely cover the storytelling traditions of Europe. Every tribe has its Odyssey. Enrollment is down, so I would have starved if I had become a classics professor. I'm not the starving kind. What about you? What drew you to forensics?
My folks wanted me to become a doctor. Not a chance. I grew up watching CSI. It had to be forensics.
The East African community is to be admired. Your people are devoted to work.
That may be true, but white people still call us niggers.
Act 1, Scene 4, the Baron's Library.
I'm sorry, Baron, but there are no bids on your work at Sotheby's. These days, they can't even sell French Impressionism. The masters.
What is happening? My last drawing, Mother of the Dead, sold for $2 million. Luckily, we have that show at the Met in spring.
It's been cancelled. The curator, who was your biggest fan, has been put out to pasture, as the Americans say. They gave him early retirement. Blacks are running the Met, the Guggenheim, and the Whitney. The CEO of the Met described your Mother of the Dead as devoid of human figures. He's a 28-year-old gay black kid from Brooklyn who arrives at work on a skateboard. They moved the primitive art from the basement to the first floor.
But you told me that abstract art was the trend in New York galleries, which is why I stopped doing realism.
It's hard to keep up with the American art scene. Nothing is permanent about this country. It's like the American singer Frank Sinatra says. You're riding high in a April, shot down in a May.
Frank who?
Oh, Blue Eyes. The Pope. Oh, ring-a-ding-ding, chairman of the board. He's the Italian who sent the Irish tenors into retirement.
I see. But if they insist upon art with human figures, what about classical art? Rome, Greece, the Renaissance, all include human figures. What will become of the great art of humankind?
You can't give that stuff away. It's all on eBay, going at bargain basement prices. It's happening all over. You can blame the conceptual artist for this. Somebody just paid $102,000 for a banana taped to a wall of a gallery.
That's ridiculous. The banana will what?
That's part of conceptual art strategy. Art that diminishes, that self-destructs.
What is this conceptual art?
Marcel Duchamp started all of these. His earliest version was Bicycle Wheel in 1913, which was a bicycle mounted on a stool. And then in 1914, in advance of a broken arm, which was a snow shovel, and bottle rack, which was just that. He coined the term ready-made for his art form in 1915 and caused a sensation when he presented Fountain, a standard urinal at the 1917 Society of Independent Artists exhibition.
What?
He was the founding gangster of one of the longest running con games in art history, conceptual art. He wooed naive bourgeois businessmen to pay his liquor bills and put him up in fancy hotels. These patrons were the first of those whom you might call the Duchamps. The urinal that made Duchamp famous wasn't even his. It was introduced to him by German-born poet and artist Baroness Elsa von Frottig-Lorgenhoven. He lied and said it was his. He became famous while the Baroness is dismissed as weird and strange by male critics and biographers, yet she's the one who signed the urinal, our mutt.
So this conceptual art is about signing your name to an object someone else created.
Yes. Duchamp wanted to sign his name to the Woolworth building.
You mean to tell me I've been spending the last 500 years busting my ass going through the rigorous process of creating a masterpiece, making sketches, buying paint, canvases, cleaning brushes, when all I had to do was sign my name to a work created by someone else? Like a scavenger.
That's the trend. The new patrons don't give a shit about greatness. They are not as refined as our usual collectors. They're insisting that the museums make a profit and not just offer excuses for tax write-offs. Pharmaceutical companies, tear gas manufacturers, owners of private prisons are now footing the bills of museums. Such is the decline in taste in this country that a Chinese immigrant was caught creating forgeries of the masters.
Was he arrested?
No! His forgeries are selling for more money than the originals. Even the art dealers and critics are corrupt. They demand that painters they represent or write glowing reviews of their shows hand them a kickback of a painting or two. You have painters paying galleries to have their paintings exhibited.
We should have remained in Bavaria.
Baron, you wanted new blood, not that stale old world type. Sluggish, sticky, type AB, ancient, artery clogging, as nutritious as a donut. Besides, when someone gave you a show, nobody would show up because of your reputation. I love this town. Such is the pollution in this city that seldom does one see a full moon. Otherwise, I would be galloping through Central Park like some fucking idiot.
Agreed. You do seem less tense. As for this American blood, it is so invigorating. After my excursions into the night, I return before dawn as though I could lift 1,000 pounds.
Your state of health is excellent, but your assets are dwindling. You're almost out of money you got from selling your English property.
What do you advise I do?
Find a black graffiti artist who would be your collaborator. That was Andy Warhol's solution. He was made to look as though he were relevant at a time when hip-hop began to take over American culture. Jean-Michel Basquiat gave him new blood. Maybe that's why he admired your dad, Count Dracula. In fact, Warhol created Dracula image on his screen. Dracula biting a girl's neck.
I told you never to mention my father's name. He was... how does that song go? Papa was a rolling stone. He left my mother and me scrounging around for inferior blood. The blood of peasants, while he gallivanted among the rich, charming ladies and duchesses with his old world style. Rumor has it that he settled in Rio and is very happy there. Lives in a fancy mausoleum, side by side with some wealthy woman he turned. At night, they terrorize the residences of the rich, carrying off debutantes. He signed his castle over to us, maybe as a result of guilty conscience. We were going to turn it into a bread and breakfast, but it is in such a state of deterioration that it was about to be condemned.
What about the collaboration?
I can never collaborate with a graffiti artist. I'd be lowering my standards.
Act 1, Scene 5.
With his cave allegory, Plato anticipates the invention of film. The shadows of individuals who pass in front of a fire are projected against a wall. Prisoners view these images as reality. Andy Warhol was one of Plato's prisoners. Instead of Plato's philosophers who freed themselves from epistemological bondage, even though Warhol wrote a book entitled The Philosophy of Andy Warhol, for him, images were reality while his life was unreal. Warhol was more like Plato than any figure of the ancient world. I imagine Plato to be an icy individual, like Warhol, someone who didn't like to be touched, shy, as cold as a Tennessee cave.
What about those hot, sexy movies he made?
Well, his models were sexy, but Warhol said that sex on the screen was more interesting than sex between the sheets. He regarded sex as work. A person obsessed with cleanliness, perhaps a result of his upbringing, he harbored a dirty secret which he carried to his grave. He constantly complained about Jean-Michel Basquiat's unhygienic habits, commented on his body odor, his lack of bathing. Warhol wondered whether Paige Powell, who was in a steady relationship with Basquiat, had recovered from him, as though she had to be debriefed. He even asked her the size of Basquiat's penis. Asked whether he would have sex with Basquiat, Warhol said he was too dirty to have sex with. Warhol described Basquiat's living quarters as a pigsty. Yet at one point, Warhol's factory reeked from the smell of urine. He and his associates created piss paintings.
What?
They say that urine paintings were about art.
Since when has piss become art?
Some Native Americans use urine in their paintings. You were supposed to look into the opinions of Warhol's crowd about Basquiat. What did you come up with?
So some of the factory inhabitants considered Basquiat a nuisance. In his The Life and Death of Andy Warhol, Victor Bacchus dismisses Jean-Michel Basquiat as a nuisance who smoked a lot of pot. Yet Warhol was an arbitral and meth addict, which accounted for his loss of weight at the time of his gallbladder operation. Was Jean-Michel merely a nuisance? Warhol was a cult leader who often humiliated his followers. An actor named Taylor Mead was so humiliated after Warhol invited people to see him film Mead's butt when he promised the shooting would be private. Mead said that if Valerie Solanas hadn't shot Warhol, he would have. The shot killed him, but it took a long time for him to die, physically. Emile D'Antonio made the same complaint about Warhol. The filming of Drunk was supposed to be private, yet D'Antonio noticed that Warhol had invited onlookers. D'Antonio threatened to sue, and the film was never released. Warhol was the fan of the snuff film, car crashes, the electric chair. Ironically, he ended up being snuffed by Valerie Solanas. After the shooting, he was said to appear zombie-like, like Dracula's victims. He had to wear a corset to prevent his guts from spilling out. Was Warhol's interest in Basquiat sexual? I mean, is that what the boxing and weightlifting were all about? The posing of Basquiat in a jockstrap, a kind of complex foreplay that would never be consummated? His obsession with Basquiat's dates, his comment that Basquiat's underwear concealed a baseball bat? And what of Warhol's intense interest in underwear? It was inevitable that Calvin Klein and the Andy Warhol Foundation in 2018 would collaborate on a line of underwear that bears Warhol's prints.
Those are some excellent leads. Gave me some ideas for my report. This is an unusual task, but I'll do my best.
Act 1, Scene 6.
Your standards don't pay the mortgage, Baron. You have to have a huge bankroll in order to live forever. We get us one of these black kids, a graffiti artist, he could be Basquiat to your Warhol.
That is out of the question. An artist of my stature, a student of Rembrandt, someone who was on a first-name basis with Rubens, Steve, and the Hooch, collaborating with a hip-hop artist.
Well, Western artists go black when they become bereft of ideas. Irving Berlin stealing Alexander's ragtime band from Scott Joplin, Picasso copying African art, Stravinsky and Gershwin writing black music, Elvis Presley stealing from Ike Turner and James Brown, Big Mama Thornton, Big Boy Crudup, 91-year-old Jasper Jones using the sketch of a knee by an African teenager and passing it off as his own creation. Blackness provided these artists with new blood. It'll pass. It's like a cyclical reboot. But for now, you have to pay the bills, the lavish parties, it all adds up.
Something to think about.
What about the girl?
She's having trouble sleeping through the day in such, shall we say, cramped quarters. I told her that she will adjust to the new norm. I got her here by promising her collaboration. She'd be my partner in a performance piece. Talking about innocence. Now this detective is showing up, asking questions. A black woman with a Dutch name. Odd.
The Dutch were the first slaveholders in New York.
Oh, didn't know that.
Well, how does the girl taste?
Oh, incredible! Her blood has that extra fizz. She's the archetypical American girl next door, the cheerleader whom you see at football games. But I think that the Chinese cleaning woman has been snooping around the basement where we rest during the day.
We should dispose of her?
No! I'll fire her.
But suppose she tells.
Listen, if she makes trouble, we will do with her what we did with the rest.
But you have more pressing needs than that. You hook up with a hip-hop painter as Warhol did. You can pay the maintenance of this townhouse. Pay me. I've done more research in an attempt to find a candidate. There's a boy named Young Blood. He's inspired by Samo.
Samo?
S-A-M-O. Same old shit. It's the group that Basquiat belonged to. They went about on the Lower East Side, drawing graffiti on buildings and painting on postcards.
So, what if I did collaborate with this Young Blood? What would my job be?
You'd insert product names into the paintings of Young Blood. Basquiat remembers his collaboration with Warhol this way.
Andy Warhol would start most of the paintings. He would put something very concrete or recognizable, like a newspaper headline or a product logo, and then I would sort of deface it. And then I would try to get him to work some more on it, and then I would work more on it. I would try to get him to do at least two things, you know? He likes to do just one hit, and then have me do all the work after that.
Basquiat said that Warhol was lazy, that he did all the work. The graffiti artist will do all the work, which will give you time to go about your nocturnal errands. Insert your icons into the paintings, and then you're on your way.
Oh my God! Are you crazy?
You know I have an aversion to icons.
Secular icons. Brand names. The stuff you find in grocery stores. You insert one of their brand names into paintings done by him. That was Warhol's job. His philosophy was that if an object is in a grocery store, it's a shopping item. If it's in a gallery, it's art. He and the members of his factory-made facsimiles of Brillo boxes, Heinz tomato ketchup, Mott's apple juice, Del Monte, peach hats, Campbell's tomato soup, and Kellogg's cornflakes. It didn't begin with using Basquiat. Warhol told Emile de Antonio that he'd quit painting and that his paintings were done by Bridget Berlin.
Is that all? I just have to insert brand names into his painting.
As simple as that. Feed him caviar and cocaine. He can use our Grubhub account to order food from White Castle. That way he'll work 24 hours a day and be very productive. Create a studio in the basement where he can work. That's how his agent, Nina Nocier, treated Basquiat.
Let's do
Raksha, do you have something about Bram Stoker, the author of Dracula, and Warhol?
Like Bram Stoker, Warhol was a sickly child whose only contact for one summer was with his mom and a Charlie McCarthy doll. Maybe that's why he anticipated a time when humans would marry non-human entities. Like Aija Rita Eklov Berliner Mauer.
She married the Berlin Wall in 1979.
And Erika Eiffel.
The Eiffel Tower in 2007.
In 2015, Floridian Linda Ducharme announced that she was in love with Bruce.
We're the Ferris wheel.
And when Bruce was in bad shape, she, like a good wife,
Donated $100,000 toward his restoration.
in 2016, Zhen Jiajia created a robot, named her Yang Yang, and married her. In 2012, Babylonia Ayvaz vowed to love and cherish a Seattle warehouse in front of a crowd of 50 onlookers. In the late 1950s, Warhol said he began an affair with his television set, but eventually married his tape recorder, which he called My Wife.
I'll bet that Plato was in love with the Parthenon.
There you go again, showing off your classical learning. Let's get some coffee.
Good idea.
Act 1, Scene 7.
The relationship between Andy Warhol and Basquiat was more like that between a primatologist and a creature than one between two painters. He spent more time observing Basquiat's comings and goings, his dining habits, than contributing to their paintings. He was a voyeur for whom the lives of others were more interesting than his own. Warhol took copious notes about those individuals who fascinated him. A Harris named Taxi, aka E.D. Sedgwick, for example. No wonder Basquiat at one point said that he was treated like a monkey. Or as one artist said, his contribution was intuitive primitivism. Basquiat was like Oda Benga to Warhol and his circle. Oda Benga was a twat who was placed in the Bronx Zoo because they couldn't determine whether he was human. Of his reviewers, Basquiat said,
"They're just racists. They have this image of me. Wild man, monkey man, whatever the fuck they think."
But aren't the signs of a primitive that of aping things? Warhol made his reputation by duplicating the creations of others. Even after his death, there were those suing him for plagiarism. When he was asked to respond to critics who said that he wasn't original, he agreed with them. When asked why he copied others, he said it was easier. People were amazed that the two, so different, would become collaborators. Basquiat included strong, black, militant references in his work. 80% of the faces in his paintings are angry. It's as if he painted with a shotgun instead of a paintbrush. Warhol interviewed Nancy Reagan and worked for the Shah's brutal, fascistic peacock throne. Basquiat fought injustice. Early on in Basquiat's career, a young graffiti artist named Michael Stewart was caught drawing the words "Purnima, Purnima" on a subway. He went into a coma and later died after a beating by the NYPD. Basquiat made a furious painting called Defacement, showing cartoon-drawn cops beating Stewart. Was Basquiat inspired by Miles Davis? Charlie Parker? Ishmael Reed disagrees. No, too little, too cool. Miles' playing was described by a critic as sounding like a man walking on eggshells. Basquiat crushed eggshells in his hands. His paintings were not a songbird, but a black vulture attacking a cow. Music in Basquiat? Maria Callas? No. Howlin' Wolf, Junior Wells, Big Maybelle. These paintings sound more like Earl Bostic, Illinois Jacquet, Big J McNilly, Arthur Prysock, Dizzy Gillespie, Art Blakey, Ben Webster, Louis, brassy, hot, provocative, belligerent, in your face. By contrast, Warhol partied with members of the Reagan administration and Nancy's beautiful white people. The relationship was also like that between an employee and an employer in one of those company towns before child labor laws. In these towns, the workers were not only exploited by the bosses, but they had to pay the bosses rent.
Funny that you would say that, Grace. Look what I found. Basquiat rented an apartment in a building owned by Warhol. Basquiat paid Warhol $4,000 per month while maintaining residences at five-star hotels like the Ritz-Carlton. So when Basquiat wondered out loud whether he was a mere flash in the pan, Warhol wondered whether, if this was true, how would Basquiat pay the rent to Andy Warhol Enterprises? So he was making money off the kid going and coming. And he wasn't the only one.
Act 1, Scene 8.
On the street in front of the Hottentot Gallery, which is scheduled a collaboration between the Baron and Youngblood, a graffiti artist, Mr. Jack Brooks holds a tin cup.
Youngblood enters from the opposite direction. All he wears is a bikini and a cowboy hat.
Hey, young man, can you spare a dollar? I haven't eaten breakfast, dinner, or lunch for that matter.
Wait, aren't you Jack Brooks?
The same.
You were big back there in the 60s. What happened?
Abstract expressionism went out of style. That's what happened. We were hit by a tsunami of pop art, conceptual art, graffiti art, earth art, installation art, animation, and other upstarts. People wanted paintings with human figures in them again.
I never understood why you black guys went for that abstract style of art. Art with no feeling, no guts, no humanity. The chilly, aloof white aesthetic. All form and no feeling. Can you imagine someone being moved to tears upon viewing a Jackson Pollock? You guys had your fling, painting forms that could be found in any geometry textbook, preferring color over content. No wonder the CIA preferred your work over political art. So did the capitalists. No risk of having someone like Lenin showing up in a picture. Thousands of provocative, political, and stirring pieces of socialist art were destroyed so that abstract expressionism could thrive.
For a while. Our world began to crumble on Halloween, October 31st, 1962. We abstract painters got tricked and treated. It was the very first show of the original pop artists, including Warhol, Lichtenstein, Siegel, and Indiana. The homophobic abstract expressionists were done. It so outraged and offended the old guard abstract expressionists, de Kooning, Rothko, Motherwell, etc., that they all resigned from the Janus Gallery in protest. The macho types who hung out at the Cedar Bar drank and sometimes fought all night. And then, as Fielding Dawson put it, when the bars closed at 4 a.m., look for a chick to take home. Since we copied everything they did, we were put out of business too. The abstract expressionism was the only way that the white galleries would accept us. Our only ticket to the big time. Now, what were we going to do? A lot of us got our start doing political art. But then there was a backlash on political art. Museums stopped displaying us, collectors stopped buying us. We were in a battle royale over which of us would be accepted. It was an early form of black on black crime. It was like the hip version of the auction block. In New York, to be a successful black artist, writer, or playwright, you need a white individual or organization to sponsor you. So, just as we settled in with abstract expressionism, these white folks changed up again on us. With no warning, they started pushing this department store art. Andy Warhol and all of these people who'd learned their techniques working at Macy's and Gimlin's. There was room for a few black abstract expressionists, people who sold out, but the rest of us were forgotten. Adding to that, minimalism started taking over as soon as we got pop art figured out. It's hard to keep up with these white folks.
Well, that's what happened to me. Barry DeWitt has asked to collaborate with me. This is an honor. And answer me this. Why did you guys think that you were any different from the early slave painters? Calling yourselves the vanguard. You were like them. Doing art to please white people, portraits that flattered white people, members of the slave-holding aristocracy. Like you, black painters of that period were doing escapist landscape while the country was teetering toward a civil war. They were painting apples and oranges while black poets and orators were risking their lives by agitating against slavery. At least the black poets of that time addressed the issues of the day, while the black painters were eager to drop out. So there's no difference between you and them, escaping the turmoil of the day, running off to Paris and Rome, like you fleeing the real world for a world of form. You can understand why the black painters of that period would shy away from political art, since any sign of dissent could get them killed. But what was your excuse? You figured that black people couldn't afford to buy paintings, and so you sold your soul to the highest bidder. Sellouts. I went to that black show at the Brooklyn Museum. The only work that made sense was Norman Rockwell's illustration of the federal marshals escorting that little black girl to the segregated school.
Do you think that working with the Baron will turn you into a Malcolm X with a paintbrush?
It's a start. Working with Warhol put Basquiat in a position to paint work that was political, like Basquiat's Defacement.
They're going to do the same thing to you that Warhol and that debauched bunch did to Jean-Michel Basquiat. Killed him with dinner parties and drugs. After they absorbed his vitality, they abandoned him. What they wanted was his new blood.
Oh yeah, you wish you had all that. Just like you elderly black people, afraid to seize an opportunity. I can't waste my time talking to you. You're feigning anachronism. We're the woke generation.
You don't get it, do you? They see you as a savage. At least we black abstract painters had our dignity, no matter how fierce we were as competitors. And how can they call you a primitive outsider? I read in Art News that your father is an optometrist and your mother is a school teacher. You went to art school. You're like those middle-class black kids who spend a couple of weeks in the hood and then record a hoodie hip-hop song that is a hit. They faked their biographies, telling everybody that they grew up in Bed-Stuy when their address was actually Scarsdale. You look silly in that costume, by the way. Red, black, and green. Aren't those the colors of Marcus Garvey's Universal Negro Improvement Association?
Marcus who? Well, the Baron's asking me to collaborate with him is the biggest break that's come in my career. As for the outfit, Whit is going to introduce me as his collaborator at the press conference. He told me to dress this way for publicity.
You sure you want to collaborate with the Baron? He lives in that townhouse uptown, seen of weird happenings, strange parties. Some are known to enter and then go missing. And whenever the Baron enters the scene, people say that they hear the sounds of wolves. And why do you suppose he scheduled the press conference during the night? Don't you find it odd that nobody sees him during the day?
You're just jealous because he didn't choose you. An old school loser. You had your chance. You old farts make me sick. Ain't nobody told you to abandon the people and do the sterile European thing.
Okay now, don't say I didn't warn you. You're nothing but a mascot to the band. Another lost soul. I was naive too. Put my faith in solidarity with New York painters. So when the Whitney Museum announced that they were going to do a black show, I felt that we had arrived. Oliver Gray called and said that the black painters were going to boycott the show because it was curated by a white person who didn't know our culture. A lot of black painters besides me heeded Oliver's demand and would do their paintings. Some didn't. And they crossed our picket line. Guess who was among those who crossed the picket line? Oliver Gray. I'll never forget the look on his face when he saw me. He just about ran into the building. He called for us to join a boycott that he violated. He wanted to be at the top of the heap. As a result of his treachery, Oliver Gray's reputation soared. The rest of us out of the way, boy, was I mad. I went to his loft. We got into a fierce argument. After that, he disappeared, never to be heard from again. At the height of his success, he disappeared because I killed him.
Act 1, Scene 9. You're saying that an art dealer encouraged Basquiat to use drugs so that he would produce more work? That's a pretty serious charge, Raksha.
No one is saying that Anina Nosei supplied him with drugs. She, like the others, just looked the other way as long as they were gaining profits from his labor, energized by his cocaine habit. Listen to this. She placed him in her basement. Given Basquiat's setup there, some called it a dungeon. He was now in a position to buy a lot of drugs, which was okay with Nosei. The drugs led to his producing more. Slaves and workers were treated in a similar manner, the only difference being that they were forced to take cocaine by their employers and masters in order to increase production. Cocaine helped Basquiat meet the demands of Nosei, who rushed his paintings into the market even though some were unfinished, sometimes at a rate of 6 paintings per week. That's how Anina Nosei treated Basquiat. Of course, he had imbibed drugs before, but now with the money made from the paintings she sold, He increased his intake of drugs. Reports from the dungeon where she installed Basquiat in 1981 find him in a pitiable state. If we're looking for foul play, what could be fouler than that? Basquiat said of the Nosé arrangement that because he was young, he didn't realize that he was a victim.
He could have said no.
He was just a kid, Grace. She gave him enough money to rent limousines, buy Armani clothes. He got paint all over them. He was propelled from living on the streets to fame, money, drugs, women. It was too much. He was only 22.
He got paint all over the Armani suits.
May I continue? Collector Doug Kramer recollects. He was painting away. He looked like a slave, or very close to it. Rich white people were invited to the basement to gawk at him as though he were the Elephant Man. Sculptor Arden Scott describes the visit. There was coke falling all over the place. It was so awful, it made my skin crawl. It was really a bad model to have an artist in the basement making work. Diego Cortez, the curator of the show New York New Wave, which was the first exhibit to include Basquiat's paintings, said, "It was like, I've got this black laborer in the basement. Look at this kind of zombie freak circus person making art." Basquiat said that he was
treated like a mascot.
Though the whites who write Basquiat books view Andy Warhol as a father figure who showered Basquiat with kindness, it was Basquiat who got him to paint again. Unlike Warhol disciples, Emile D'Antonio saw through the spin put on the relationship created by Warhol worshippers.
To most people, Jean-Michel dominated Andy. Andy had been victimized, but I saw it quite the other way. I came to the conclusion that Andy was a prime mover of a fairly evil thing in relation to Jean-Michel.
Photographer Christopher Makos, who introduced Basquiat's work to Warhol, saw the relationship as yet another example of vampire lesbianism.
I'm impressed. You put a lot of work into this. Originally, you said that this assignment was a waste of time.
It caught my interest. I stayed up until 4 a.m. putting 2 and 2 together. Check this out. Basquiat was even more like Cinderella than Warhol. He was abandoned by his father and a schizophrenic mother. Cinderella's father betrayed Cinderella by marrying a nagging, prying bitch who was jealous of her. And then, like her mother before, he died on her. The stepsisters were envious of Cinderella, like stepsister Warhol was envious of Basquiat. There were no happy endings for either Basquiat or Cinderella. Cinderella married a prince, but he was overthrown by a coup. And Cinderella was placed in a dungeon. And like Miles Davis, another Cinderella, Basquiat's prince never came.
Act 1, Scene 10.
Congratulations on the show! I thought that Youngblood, your collaborator, would have been here. What happened?
He came down with the flu.
Oh, his work is not as impressive as Basquiat's, but it'll do. What was your contribution to the show?
My contribution, the logo for the Tabasco sauce. Did you enjoy it? That was my contribution.
Young Blood is lucky. He's hitchhiking on the Baron's name.
Looks to me like the Baron is the one who is benefiting. I checked your sales. Pretty low. Looks like people are tired of drawings of Mother of the Dead, your obsession.
Yes, we've heard that criticism before.
And why are all these art dealers making such a fuss about Youngblood's picture of Archie Moore, the former light heavyweight champion of the world? That don't look like no Archie Moore to me. It looks like something a child would have drawn. And what's with the crown on his head? Youngblood went to a fancy art school, so he knows how to spell.
We instructed him to misspell. What would graffiti art be without bad spelling? Bad spelling is trending. Part of young blood's genius is his being untamed, raw and powerful. The crown is a tribute to the late Jean-Michel Basquiat, his idol.
Well, I hope he gets better. Still, it's strange that he would miss the opening of the show.
We have got to go to the reception.
Is that all, detective?
You can go. I'll be checking in on you from time to time.
Well, I am glad to cooperate, detective. But in the future, I want you to call ahead instead of just showing up.
This is not Europe, Baron. We don't recognize no titles over here. We show up anytime we wish when a kidnapping is involved.
I thought that when I sailed into New York Harbor and saw the Statue of Liberty, I thought this country would be different.
But weren't you the one who said that the Statue of Liberty had to be created by a European sculptor because America never produced a first-rate sculptor?
We're late.
The Baron
and Agent Wolf.
Exit.
I'll bet they're doing to this new child what Andy Warhol and his band of vampires did to Jean-Michel Basquiat. He was exploited by those art dealers and collectors. They got new blood, all right. He thought that they were his friends. That's where that child went wrong. They were no friends of his. They were out for the money. That child died at 27. And they're still using him. Murdoch Goodman selling his sketches for $2,000. Tiffany and Company using his paintings in a full-page ad in the New York Times, November 6, 2021. A clear case of commercial slumming. Louis Vuitton publishing his books. The black woman who preceded me, one of those historic firsts, told me that she tried to tell the precinct captain back there in the 1980s that they were giving this child heroin, but he wouldn't hear of it. He told her that she was an affirmative action hire and that she should stay out of trouble and not get involved in something that was above her pay grade. He said that Warhol was not only a powerful celebrity, but owned buildings. One of the black cops took her aside and told her the department had a hands-off policy when it came to the rich, white, and powerful. But when it came to the hippies and the blacks, the walls of the 9th precinct were caked with their blood. She failed to save Jean-Michel, but maybe I can save this new fool. My precinct captain can't be as crass as the one she worked under. Times have changed. He can't control me. He said that I was spending too much time trying to solve the case of this missing black girl, Jennifer Blue, and that the Baron was complaining about my pestering him. That captain started to walk away. I grabbed him by the collar and I told him, "Don't you be walking away from me when I'm talking to you." Cops in the station gathered around. I said, You nearly called in the National Guard when a white girl is missing. The news media be broadcasting white girls is missing. The news media broadcasting it around the clock. Look at that. No singing, no dancing Britney Spears trying to free herself from her father. She ain't even kidnapped. But that's all you hear about, Britney Spears, Britney Spears. She gets more coverage than the Lord's mother. If she ever got kidnapped, the government would declare martial law. Well, he said, all nervous.
I'll give you another week.
I looked that sucker right in his eye, and I told him, I ain't leaving this case until I find out what happened to Jennifer Booth. Are you making any progress on the Basquiat matter?
Yes, Detective Van Helsing. One critic called Basquiat Warhol's mascot. When the mascot behaved, he was rewarded. When he misbehaved, he was punished. During a trip to Milan, Warhol physically assaulted the boy, which must have reminded him of the blows he took from his father. Warhol boasted about it. Warhol was upset because Basquiat received more attention in Italy than he did. Warhol was cruel to his children.
Was Basquiat one of those young people who was harmed by his association with Warhol?
Basquiat fit right into the well-established Warhol youth culture mythos, according to Dodson Rader, who had written about his warped Pied Piper role in a 1974 Esquire article entitled, "Andy's Children, They Die Young." Rader wrote,
He is like an overindulgent scoutmaster who slips a kid's grass and ignores the sounds coming from the pup tents at night. Warhol is a father figure to the kids around him, but he is an insufficient one. He listens and watches, but can never come up with more than an old reel to their need.
Paige Powell was so concerned about Basquiat's drug addiction, she asked Warhol to intervene. Warhol's response?
He said, maybe he wants to be the first to go out early.
In a review of Warhol's The Philosophy of Andy Warhol, Barbara Goldsmith wrote,
The important message is how Warhol managed to make himself into a machine-like presence, devoid of empathy.
He had a falling out with Edie Sedgwick when she and Bobby Dylan had a relationship. Maybe the reason he expressed no empathy toward Edie or Jean-Michel was because he saw himself as a teenager.
The same reviewer said that Warhol's musings came off as the musings of a teenager. Basquiat even asked Warhol's permission to marry his girlfriend, Paige Powell.
But the father was absent when they needed him. After he'd gotten everything from them, Edie's beauty, Basquiat's potency, they were cast aside. When told that Edie Sedgwick might commit suicide, Warhol quipped,
I wonder if Edie will commit suicide. I hope she lets me know so I can film it.
losing the affection of the father, like Cinderella, whose father, a baron, died when she was a kid. Sedgwick and Basquiat became what sociologist Phyllis Chesler would call father-wounded, wounded by Warhol. Both died at almost the same age, between 27 and 28.
From overdoses.
Warhol could not aid these young people. Warhol made a similar remark when he heard of dancer and choreographer Freddie Herco's suicide. The Palace of the Dragon Prince in Villanelle by Herco premiered at Judson Memorial Church, featured a rising star named Carla Blank. Warhol said that he wished he had been able to film Herco's death, too. Herco was 26. Overhearing this remark, Warhol's screenwriter, Ronald Tavell, said, "Sometimes I admit that his coldness was shocking. Some of his responses that he made to the deaths at the factory, I could not believe."
Travell tried to sue for payment for his screenwriting. Warhol's hiring of fancy lawyers discouraged him.
His obsession with suicide became so intense that he made a black silk screen painting based on a photograph given to him by a policeman that showed the scene where a young woman had leapt to her death. She was lying face down,
Crushed on the brick pavement in the courtyard, having fallen from the 8th floor window.
Warhol made a joke about the suicide of hundreds of Jim Jones followers. Said that if they had drunk the poisoned Campbell soup instead of Kool-Aid, then he, Warhol, would have made the news. But wasn't Warhol a wig-wearing minor Jim Jones? Is there such a thing as foul play by neglect?
Email these notes to Grace. I think it's time for an intermission.
Please feel free to stretch your feet, stretch your legs, stretch your feet. Are they all squirrels or something? Squirrels stretching their feet. Please get up, take a walk outside, get some food, get some wine, get some water, use the restroom. We'll be back in 10 minutes. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Back to. Please join us for a 10-15 minute talk back with the playwright Ishmael Reed and a few of the actors. Please formulate your questions, hear his thoughts on this wonderful piece, and we won't keep you too long, but we just love to hear his voice and share a few of his thoughts as he thought about putting this piece together. So as soon as we're done, which will be in about 45 minutes after we start, Ishmael Reed and a few of the actors will take the stage. Please hang out with us for a little bit and ask him a few questions. Thank you all. Actors, stand by, please. As soon as Mr. Reed comes out of the restroom, we'll begin. Thank you. And cheers. White or red? Who loved caviar? Thank you.
Act 2, Scene 1.
Who killed Jean-Michel Basquiat? The decadent Warhol Circle? The insults from the museums like New York MoMA, which said that exhibiting his work would be a waste of space? The commissions that had him turning out work 24 hours per day from a patron's dungeon? The insults from whites in the United States and abroad, both from art world insiders and from those who crossed his path in everyday life? Phoebe Hoban, in her Basquiat, A Quick Killing in Art, wrote, "He was treated weirdly, strangely, like he was an oddity. People were entertained by him, fascinated for the moment, but would sooner or later throw him away. Or he was feared, you know, just genuinely feared. No matter where he went in the world, Basquiat was pulled over. A white photographer recalls, in Paris, guns drawn, the police asked if a woman who had fallen asleep in the back seat of his car was dead. Was he killed by the critics? Basquiat stopped talking to Warhol after reading their text."
Can you read some?
Particularly nasty, vicious, and cruel was Hilton Kramer, who wrote,
He was essentially a talentless hustler, street smart, but otherwise invincibly ignorant. who used his youth, his looks, his skin color, and his abundant sex appeal to win an overnight fame that proved to be his undoing. Yet, for a few vertiginous years before he died of a drug overdose in 1988, big-time art dealers were vying for his work. Critics were singing his praise, and collectors, almost as ignorant about art as Basquiat himself, were outbidding each other to acquire his dabs, scribbles.
Basquiat accuses the art dealers of pimping him and art critics of being maggots on his corpse. Though one of the art dealers, Mary Boone, is depicted in the stories about Basquiat peddled by white writers and Julian Schnabel as someone who was burned in by their relationship with Basquiat. One critic had it right, calling her a kind of female Sammy Glick. Mary Boone went to prison for tax fraud. She received 30 months. She spent $800,000 on an apartment renovation and $19,000 on a shopping spree at Hermes and Louis Vuitton. Did she pilfer money from Basquiat?
The emergence of critics from colored backgrounds has rendered such white, ethnocentric pronouncements obsolete. Who was the primitive? Basquiat, who drew inspiration from multiple traditions, or his white critics, whose devotion to white supremacy and whose narrow Eurocentric education rendered them incapable of detecting how these traditions influenced his work? The reaction to these new critics has generated the kind of typical mass hysteria that bursts to the surface in the US from time to time. Instead of requesting a refund from Princeton, Harvard, and Yale, which provided them with a fake Eurocentric point of view, as useful as a fax machine when assessing the complex racial history of the United States, they strike out, accusing their critics of identity politics because they resist identifying with them.
Nothing new. The Emperor Hadrian gave the Jews a hard time because they refused to Romanize.
The Emperor Hadrian? There you go again. What does the Emperor Hadrian have to do with it? Isn't he the one who built some silly wall in England?
Basquiat frequently cites the classics in his work. Besides, in his painting, Basquiat shows that he's very familiar with the Western classical tradition. In his painting, Jawbone of an Ass, 1982, Aristophanes, Socrates, and Sophocles are cited.
Well, while you've been rummaging through the classics, trying to find an analogy between some emperor and Basquiat, I interviewed a Native American critic, Charlene Touchette, who has a different point of view, which Kramer and other white critics, viewing themselves as members of the master race, failed to discern. She is an artist who lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Touchette said, "Not surprising that Eurocentric critics ignored the native influence on Jean-Michel because they had no way of knowing that he had seen the art I showed him. And even if they did, they would have probably not acknowledged it since they didn't value anything American Indian." By the way, these Jean-Michel Basquiat paintings also show the influence of contemporary Indian art on his compositional style, use of pictographic symbols, and indigenous political ideas, and his use of imagery associated with Indians like arrows, teepees, horned figures or masks, and barbed wire signifying reservation confinement. Jean-Michel and I also spoke about how he connected to his family's Indian ancestry too. Invincibly ignorant, Basquiat knew Western art and did parodies of work by the masters. Not as a copycat, but as a jazz musician who would take the chords of a Tin Pan Alley classic and reharmonize them. But he wandered into territory that was deemed off limits to Kramer and his white supremacist posse. Basquiat knew African art as well, having traveled to Africa. Basquiat was eclectic, multicultural. Kramer was stuck in his taste, unmovable, the narrowest of Eurocentrics. So why should we accept the terms they used to define Basquiat's art? White critics, knowing little about the traditions of others, Attempt to define them using their terms. Neo-expressionism, primitive, and art Afrofuturism. Why not neo-indigenous? They said that he must have been influenced by Jean Dubuffet. Basquiat told them he had not been influenced by Dubuffet. They called Basquiat a liar.
Raksha, I found Robert Hughes' comments to be equally cruel. Like other advocates of high culture, Hughes said that whenever blacks or women make strides, it's due to political correctness. We hear that all the time around here. He wrote, monochrome late American art industry felt a need to refresh itself with a touch of the primitive. The reputation may survive, or it may not. If it does, it will only show once more, as if further proof were needed, that the perch in the pantheon of the 1980s does not necessarily depend on merit. His stardom was waning badly when he died, because the fashion that had rised him up was already tired of him. Syringes flung cruelly by the zeitgeist. The only thing that brought Basquiat back into the spotlight was his death. And listen to this. Those who provided the research for the TV news show 60 Minutes planted Hughes' idea in Morley Safer's script. Shown with a group of black schoolchildren at the Whitney Museum of Art, American Art's retrospective of Jean-Michel Basquiat's work, Mr. Safer asks, "Do you think you could do as well?" "Yeah," responds one of the children, "I could do better than that." Of Basquiat as an artist, Mr. Safer explained to viewers that in 1988, when his popularity was declining, his career was saved. He died of a drug overdose, and now that there would be no more Basquiats, the market fell in love with him all over again. Yes, he died of an overdose, but who led him there?
Are you saying that someone killed him with an overdose?
No, they set the conditions. The atmosphere which led to his using drugs excessively.
Another example of so-called critical analysis came from Vivian Rayner, who published her review in the New York Times of the 1985 Tony Shafrazi Gallery exhibit, featuring the collaboration of Basquiat and Warhol. The two artists had a falling out after the show drew criticism. Was Basquiat exploited? When discussing this show of Warhol and Basquiat's collaborative works, she stated in an almost racist tone,
Last year, I wrote to Jean-Michel Basquiat that he had a chance of becoming a very good painter, providing he didn't succumb to the forces that would make him an art world mascot.
Judging the collaboration, Rayner said that Warhol had scored a TKO over Basquiat. Since Basquiat did most of the work on this collaboration, and Basquiat was from Brooklyn, using Rayner's boxing metaphor, she might be guilty of a Manhattan hometown decision. Basquiat was not the only one who accused Warhol of taking credit for work that wasn't his. Lynne Goldsmith was successful in winning a lawsuit against Warhol on appeal in March 2021 after the Second Circuit Court of Appeals reversed a 2019 ruling from New York's federal court, finding that Andy Warhol made fair use of Goldsmith's 1981 photograph of Prince when he created the Prince series. Goldsmith appealed that verdict, arguing that the Warhol artworks were not a transformative use of her image.
We agree.
Judge Gerard E. Lynch wrote,
The Prince series works are substantially similar to the Goldsmith photograph as a matter of law.
Those who posed as Basquiat's friends exploited him in a different way. Filmmaker Jim Jarmusch explained why he refused to see Julian Schnabel's film about Basquiat.
I knew Jean-Michel, and he was not friends with Julian. I like Julian very much. He's a very generous guy, even if he is an egocentrical character. I refused to talk to Schnabel about Jean-Michel when he was making the film. Jean-Michel was not a fan of Schnabel as a person back then. I would not portray him in that way.
Basquiat's female companion, Paige Powell, says that Basquiat ridiculed Schnabel's work. In the Schnabel film, Paige Powell is depicted as an innocent who martyred herself on behalf of a crazy, so unreliable that he stood up to Mary Boone, who was receiving 50% commission on each painting she sold. In her own account, Paige Powell said that she was right there with Basquiat doing cocaine and heroin.
Andy Warhol dismissed Schnabel as pushy, a bad painter who visits other people's studios to see what he can copy. Warhol got a lot of laughs when he related that Schnabel stood before his paintings and explained to everybody what they meant. Schnabel's film, Basquiat, should have been called the Schnabel Home Movie. But it shows that those who pretended to admire him could be just as insensitive about the painter as Kramer, Rayner, and Hughes. Schnabel, who boasted that he was as close to Picasso as we're gonna get, becomes Basquiat in a twisted way. Since Basquiat's father didn't grant him permission to use the originals in the film, Schnabel painted Basquiat imitations. Schnabel's own paintings appear in the film as much as his Basquiat imitations. He's all over the place, including contributing to a song in a soundtrack marred by white men, straining to sound like Negroes. All of Schnabel's interests are brought to bear in Basquiat. Rayner wrote,
"The baronial interior of his current home appears as Milo's domicile. There are cameos by his parents, his daughters, and his second wife, most of them as Milo's relatives. And while Schnabel doesn't actually appear in the movie himself, the scene of Basquiat and Warhol's collaboration at the factory has several silkscreen paintings that depict Schnabel as a young lean man, paintings that Warhol never made."
So, Schnabel's producing and directing a film about Basquiat, given that Schnabel and Basquiat were rivals, is what it would have been like if Joe Frazier had produced and directed a film about Muhammad Ali. It shows. Basquiat is shown as a junkie stumbling around New York, living in a cardboard box. Yet Charlene Touchette says that he had jobs. A downtown Tribeca clubhouse movie. Schnabel's most telling scene comes when Basquiat enters Schnabel's home. Schnabel gives him an update about his success, while Basquiat, his reputation as a hot painter on the decline, listens.
About 5 minutes is spent on Basquiat picking at a pimple. Basquiat draws a portrait of Schnabel's daughter. Milo picks it up and uses it to put down Basquiat, saying to her,
"You're prettier than that."
It's obvious to the viewer that Schnabel has a family, Basquiat doesn't.
After the visit, Basquiat urinates in Schnabel's stairwell, and in an interview with Charlie Rose, describes this as Basquiat marking territory. A curious way of putting it because scent marking, in this case using the smell of urine to mark territory, is what animals do.
Reminds me of a scene in Critical Condition, a film that starred Richard Pryor during his decline. In one scene, Pryor plays a dog who urinates on a man's leg.
Throughout the Schnabel film, surfers are shown. Couldn't part of the budget have been spent on showing a scene in Hawaii? Because before returning to New York, Basquiat was drug-free while living in there. He said,
"New York is killing me!"
Warhol returned to his religious origins after being shot by Valerie Solanas. At the time of his death, a painting of Jesus Christ covered an entire wall of his studio. The Greek Byzantine church is gravely serious about icons. For this church, icons are windows on heaven. Was the shooting a warning from God that Warhol had substituted the icons for capitalism for those of saints? And why? The images having to do with travel. Mobil Oil's Pegasus, Pontiac, Mercedes logos, they all having to do with Warhol subconsciously realizing the distance he traveled from the church? Were these saints of capitalism false idols, substitution for the real saints? And that by inserting a motorcycle in Warhol's take on Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper, was Warhol giving a sign that he had returned home? Or was the sexually ambiguous individual sitting next to Jesus the image that got his attention? Warhol was attracted to sexual ambiguity. Or was it the eel that appears on the menu? The eel totem fits Warhol, deceptive, mistaken for a snake. It is actually a fish. A surrealist gag, one that poet Ted Jones would like. The eel has expensive taste, like the eel prefers trout and doesn't settle for rock cod. But like Duchamp and his follower Warhol, the eel is a scavenger, profiting from the ideas of others, plagiarizing. Basquiat once served eel to a group of art dealers. With the lunch, was he making a point that he was being scavenged? He said that art dealers had pimped him. Was Warhol's painting, The Virgin and the Child, a way of asking forgiveness by substituting Marilyn Monroe for the Madonna? Around the factory, Warhol was called the Pope, Father. He was given church monarchers.
Basquiat was not the only black genius encouraged to do drugs in order to increase production. It's like if one would inject a horse with Layce to improve its performance. Capitalism was greedy for speedy production from artists whose patrons were no longer royalty in the church, but streamers, Spotify, Apple, Amazon. They were under pressure to create new work for sold-out concert tours. For Wall Street, art was just another commodity that had to be sold, a trend that began in 1904. This required artists like Basquiat, Michael Jackson, Prince, and others to go without sleep and depend upon stimulants to stay awake so that they could meet demand. So the muse had evolved from the dainty figure of the Victorian era to a figure who would kick your ass, pummel you with blows of creativity that kept you up nights so as not to miss a note, a lyric, or a deadline. Yes? Okay. Right.
Who was that?
Van Helsing. She wants to see me. Wants to know how much progress we're making. I gotta go.
She'll put us on a deadline. I better work on my notes. Let's see. One of his girlfriends, Susan Malik, was able to tell which drug influenced which painting, whether it was cocaine or heroin. He turned to heroin after cocaine was created a hole in his nose. Except for Page, nobody seemed to care, as long as he was producing art from which others benefited. And so, when Basquiat was broke, he sold his body for $10 a pop. In the end, did he sell his soul? He was no longer the infant terrible who would sell a postcard for 65 cents to purchase a package of cigarettes, which would be resold by the buyer for $1,000. Warhol said that at one point Basquiat played for the market. Most of the white critics regarded Basquiat as a graffiti artist who benefited from his relationship with Warhol. He resented the title. He said that his friends who were formerly called graffiti artists like Keith Haring were no longer called that by the critics. Others say that Basquiat resurrected Warhol. Basquiat got Warhol to paint again, which he abandoned 20 years before their meeting. Now, Warhol's mascot work was worth more than Warhol's Basquiat's Untitled in 1982 ranks number 10 among the highest amounts paid for a painting, selling at $110.5 million. Warhol's Double Diatribe, 1963, comes in at number 12, $105.4 million. Maybe jealousy is the reason Basquiat was feared and hated. He's still hated. An execrable graphics novel by Julien Village and Soren Maasdal called Basquiat shows that the hatred of Basquiat hasn't subsided. Published in 2019, 31 years after his death. From the first page, which shows Basquiat in his shorts, laying on a bed surrounded by drug paraphernalia, to the last page, which shows the same view. Basquiat is shown as a violent, crazed, angry individual who is so hard to handle that he drives his mother to a mental institution. A thief who robs elderly white women and abuses white lovers. Only when he snorts coke does he become a monster and is able to paint. While the facial expressions of whites are calm, Basquiat is shown throwing tantrums and his eyes bulging. Very little about his art. The preponderance of the drawings shown undressed white women with Basquiat getting high. He's even shown handcuffed to a bed, presided over by a dominatrix. Like the imperialistic who shat on the Haitian flag, Village substitutes his own art for Basquiat's. You don't have to be a black genius to reach a bad end in the world of art. Look at the white artists who died of overdose, suicide, and poverty. There must have been some place where Basquiat found peace, a refuge from art dealers, buyers, and the Warhol death cult. My research has found that Hawaii was a place where he could escape the pressure. Basquiat traveled to Hawaii one last time. During his last night on the island, he dreamed about Richard Pryor. Basquiat and Pryor had met in Los Angeles. Fred Hoffman had arranged for Basquiat to paint Richard Pryor's portrait. It was after Pryor's accident that occurred during an episode of freebasing. There was no portrait as a consequence, but Pryor telling Basquiat that he had bought the film rights to the Charlie Parker story, another genius murdered by New York, inspired Basquiat to do a spate of drawings about the saxophonist.
Act 2, Scene 3.
Who are you?
I'm the new cleaning lady.
It's 1 o'clock in the morning. Aren't you supposed to come during the day?
I'm working the night shift. I thought the employment agency told ya.
Very well. But don't throw anything out. And do not enter the basement. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll have some errands to run.
Now let's find out what he's hiding in the basement.
But he told me he loved me and that I could live forever.
Dumb bitch. That man don't love nobody but himself.
But he
What
left.
did they teach you at the bar?
But he left 2 puncture wounds on my neck. He said in Bavaria, this is a sign of affection.
He had you down there sleeping in a coffin. Didn't you think that was odd?
He said he and I were rehearsing for a performance piece. Jennifer faints.
Better get an ambulance over here. Got a girl here. She's lost a lot of blood.
Young blood appears. Where's the Baron?
Boy, go put some clothes on. What's wrong with you? My blood type is O, if you need some. Boy, this art world is not what it used to be. We sure have come a long way from Jacob Lawrence and Charles White and Margaret King, my favorite, whose husband was another one of these plagiarists. You see today's paper? A Dutch museum paid an artist $83,000 for a painting. He returned a blank canvas that had the words, take the money and run.
Young blood returns with more clothes on.
Why didn't you show up for the show, which featured your collaboration?
He locked me in. He said that nobody had ever heard of me and that he was the one who was important. They had me working 24 hours turning out paintings. They gave me cocaine to keep me awake. They kept feeding me some black stuff, tiny fish eggs or something. I need to go to Taco Bell.
Looks to me like you did all the collaborating.
He put some famous logo in a painting, like GM for General Motors, then ordered me to do the rest. And then he would disappear and come home shortly before dawn. That's him now. What's taking him so long?
I had the luck, King.
Let's begin! Open the door!
Young blood goes to open the door.
Don't you open that door. Get your things. I'm taking you out of here.
Oh, open the door! Somebody open the door! I'm locked out! Help!
You heard me. You stand right where you are. As I always say, sunlight is the best disinfectant.
But he's my
my mentor.
Boy, if you dare open that door, I'll smack your face.
Agent Antonio Wolf enters.
Well, if it isn't Mr. Antonio Wolf.
Where's the Baron?
You're standing in him. He took off.
Detective Van Helsing leads Youngblood by the hand to exit.
Now, step over that pile of desks outside the door respectfully. After all, it was once a baron.
Act 2, Scene 5.
Not only do the critics ignore the influence of Native American art on Basquiat's work, but they neglect the Egyptian influence. He joins a number of black artists who are fascinated with Egypt. Sun Ra, Abbey Lincoln, Michael Jackson, and others.
Explain.
A number of Basquiat's paintings include body parts. For example, Basquiat's King of Egypt shows body fragments, teeth, torso, and head. They chopped up Osiris's body. And what are we to make of a painting he left with us? It's called Nile. Was Isis resembling her husband/brother, similar to the revival of Basquiat? Has Basquiat become the beautiful boy of the 2000s, reincarnated as himself? If Basquiat was not acquainted with Osiris, he was certainly familiar with Baron Samedi, a Haitian Loa who is a mythological descendant of Osiris. The Guilt of Gold Teeth, a 14-foot wide work, which Basquiat painted when he was 22, sold on November 9th, 2021 for $40 million. It includes Baron Samedi, whose Yoruba antecedent is Iku. The paintings were done in 1982. Osiris and Baron Samedi both preside over the dead. And maybe he was familiar with the redhead, the mother of the dead, the Irish Loa, the Baron's wife who rejected advances from the son of Dracula. But like Antonius, some regard him as a demon, a trickster. He was a demon to the principal whose face Basquiat used as a target for a cream pie. Was his father attempting to get rid of the demon in Basquiat when he stabbed him? Warhol is supposed to have told Gerald Malanga that he imagined himself as the keeper of a male brothel, tending the register in a large dormitory with rows of beds without partitions between them. People would come in and have sex with a boy in a bed and then pay Andy the money on their way out. Could it be said that Warhol sold parts of Basquiat's soul? Was Basquiat sacrificed by those who chose profits over his well-being? Basquiat was the most beautiful of the beautiful boys, and though many women loved him, he was a virgin thrown into the midst of the damned.
John Giorno exposes the dark side of the Warhol legend in his book, Great Demon Kings. His fellow Buddhist, Jenny Lim, described the Warhol culture as predatory and decadent. Few escaped this decadence. One who did was Ultraviolet. She writes,
Yes, I have gone through many dangers, toils, and snares. I have been brought safe, I feel, to tell this story. To tell about the psychological and sociological devastation, the errant activities, the public sex, the hedonism, and excelsis, the anything goes films in which the performers were stoned on drugs. Then, to make it worse, we exposed our exploits before young students and encouraged them to get as stoned as our performers. Even though for me, sexual immortality was but the despairing side of the search for emotional security. I have to acknowledge that I participated in the movement that helped lay the basis for the explosion of hardcore pornography, drug pestilence, and the AIDS plague. Most of us have paid a heavy price. Some with our lives, some with our health, others with years squandered. I feel I was luckier than most for the 70s when death brushed me. I repented and found my way to inner peace.
Basquiat was an innocent among the vile who had prosecuted themselves and craved new blood. The leeches got fat, bleeding him until there was no more blood to bleed. He could bleed no more. He thought an artistic family would substitute for his mother and father. Everybody whose mother has left them knows this feeling. His father kicked him out, and so he ended up in the village. What would have happened if he had traveled to Haiti from Hawaii instead of returning to New York to die? Suppose that Richard's intervention, coming in the form of a dream, had actually happened. Instead of returning to his killer, New York, to be finished off, Basquiat took Richard of the dream's advice. Suppose that in 1988 he left Maui and went to the land of his father's ancestors, Haiti, the city of Jacmel, a city surrounded by blue pools fed by waterfalls, a scene of lush vegetation, where Raymond-les-Bains is a popular beach. Suppose that he would have restored an abandoned chateau built in the 1700s, that once a week he would go into town to buy groceries and a bottle of rum, makes papier-mâché masks for carnival, sometimes joining the carnival. No art dealers, patrons, buyers, critics to bother him, to work him to death. Instead, admiring townspeople are very respectful of his privacy. He would have survived. He would be 61 years old.
Instead, Basquiat returned to New York, the graveyard for black geniuses. Lee Morgan murdered at Slugs. Charlie Parker overdosed. Bob Thompson dead at 28. Was Basquiat a victim of foul play? The critics, the museums, jealous rivals, members of the Warhol Circle, the women groupies who pampered him and joined him in his self-destruction, unscrupulous art dealers. You don't have to use a weapon to be guilty of foul play.
Are you ready to submit our report to Dr. Van Helsing?
I think we have enough.
Thank you all very much for being here tonight. We won't keep you too much longer, but I thought we'd invite our playwright, Ishmael to join us for a few minutes and to share some of his thoughts with us. And please, if you feel like you wish to ask questions of Brother Reed, please feel free to do so. Actors, if you wish to come back and join us, please feel free. I'll bring the chairs up a little bit, so now you're not just actors, but you are now participants. If you wish to come in and join us. If not, please join the audience. Before we start, please, a round of applause for Ishmael. We became associates with you and African American Shakes because of a grant that you wished to work with us. This was about 2 years ago now. My gosh, time flies. Well, I think 2020 didn't really exist. Right? That's a year that we can forget. But so tell us what prompted you to write this. It's so deep, it's so prolific, it's so well researched. What prompted you to write it, and where do you want this play to move to in the future?
Well, there's an official line which has hundreds of millions of dollars backing it that holds the Warhol as a sort of benevolent male nurse who has to take care of this savage and keep him out of trouble. And so I started doing research, and I believe in coincidences. So I was in New York for my play, The Haunting of Lynne Manuel Miranda, which takes down Hamilton, this fraud which sort of honors a slave master, slave trafficker, no matter what they say. And there were coincidences where people would mention Basquiat, and the final incident was a older sculptor, black sculptor, who walking towards the subway, and he said he actually delivered art supplies to Basquiat, and it seemed that Basquiat was looking for a older black person or a painter to be his mentor. Matter of fact, when he came to San Francisco, he tried to contact Ray Saunders. So I said this guy was alienated from the fraternity of black painters and artists. And it was in a village with degenerates like William Burroughs. Matter of fact, he was influenced by William Burroughs, one of the most degenerate characters in American culture, whose home was a sort of like place where you come in, get high off the street, shoot heroin. And Burroughs would take the first shots because he didn't want to get AIDS. So I mean, if you read, I mentioned the Demon Kings by John Giorno. It's got it all in there, like a totally decadent, anti-woman, homophobic sequel, where all these people were like stepping over each other, and conning bourgeois art patrons.
You are such a prolific writer. You've written how many plays?
I've written 11 plays.
A lot of plays. That means like more than 12.
Yeah.
More than 15?
No, about 11.
Yeah, about 11 plays.
Most recent, there was a performance tonight. Most recent.
Right, and
about the San Francisco school recall.
Right, and your research is so deep and so well done. One of the questions that my actors had as we rehearsed this play over the past 4 days, 5 days or so, I should say 5 days of rehearsal, we rehearsed about a week and a half, was every person that, first of all, I wanted to tell my actors, they're probably sick of me hearing it, but I said every character, every name, and actors will nod their heads in a few seconds, I said, actors, every name that you mention in this play is a real person, is that correct?
Yeah.
Right.
What happened was that the Warhol Foundation was the first to launch a suit against me. That's how they handle things. They have hundreds of millions of dollars. Because I transformed a photograph that Warhol did of Basquiat. And in the photograph, Basquiat is only wearing a jockstrap. Basquiat had a painting which listed the words leeches, parasites, leeches and parasites. So I put leeches all over his body, and I put Warhol's face inside of each leech, and they threatened to shut down the show.
Wow.
So we had to abandon that, because they just claimed that they had the right to transform that Prince picture. So I wrote a letter that was published in the New York Times. I said, well, when I try to transform his photograph, they want to sue me. Then Anina Nosei wanted to sue. This is a funny thing. Carroll directed that play at the Theater for the New City, doing my play tonight. It's on tonight. And
That's okay. That's exactly the sound effect we had for. So I feel good about that. I feel justified that that's the sound that I chose. Yeah.
So we do a skating thing on Anina Nosei in the first act. And because I think most of the stuff is stuff that I gathered from other people who witnessed the condition of Basquiat in her basement. She took him off the streets and just kept feeding him a supply of cocaine to get him to work. And he said that he was her victim. He said that in print about an interview. And she'd bring these rich people in to gawk at him. And she sold paintings of his that were not finished. She was really out for money. So I walk out into the lobby during intermission, and there's Carroll standing there with Anina Nosei. Wow. I'm gonna get it. She said, no, let's pose for pictures. So we all posed for pictures. They were an arts newspaper that goes all over the world, pictures of people. Wow. She was hard of hearing. Wow. So somebody sent her the script, and she threatened to sue.
She threatened to sue. She's hard of hearing.
So she didn't hear.
So she couldn't hear her name in the show.
Somebody sent her the script.
I mean, she read it.
She read the script.
Yeah.
And she threatened to sue.
Yeah.
So the play was supposed to go back to New York in last October, I think, yeah. we're supposed to return because we got a great, good reception. Even when the other theaters were closed down during the pandemic, we got great audiences. Turns out that the producer was a friend of Nina Lucey.
Wow.
And they lived in the same building.
Wow.
And they've been friends for many years. She said, "You can't bring that play back." But the play is going to be published by Simon Schuster. As a matter of fact, it's at the printers now. So this is really weird because Carroll and I were on we met doing a performance at the Bridge Theater in 1965.
The which theater?
Bridge.
Bridge Theater. Gotcha.
With Andrew Tabolini and N.H. Pritchard. And we stop over to Max's Kansas City and sit around with Wall. Sit around talking to him. Never did I think that, I would really investigate this play and found such a decadent, you might even call him an evil person that he was. And so I wanted to straighten the record is that it was the other way around. Basquiat made Warhol. Warhol's reputation was on the decline.
Yep.
And they used the term new blood. And, Warhol did movies about vampires. And I said, well, let's put it all together. Vampires and, all that. And this play, will survive. So there is a movement now. They did the official, as a matter of fact, when they started to sue me, the Warhol Foundation, they said, we have our own play. So they did the official play at the Old Vics. But even in Europe, they mentioned that, I'd done a play too. At least in Europe, they mentioned that. And what happened was they took this guy from New Zealand, who's a cleaner. I call him a cleaner. He cleaned up the reputation of Pope Benedict, who can't come out of the Vatican for fear of being arrested. That's right. Have you noticed that?
Yes.
For covering up the Vatican scandal, the child abuse. So he cleaned him up, got him all hip, giving Beatles records to people and stuff like that. So he cleaned him up. Then he cleaned up Churchill, which is like one of the subjects of my play that's running in New York right now. Churchill was the one who divided Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India. Divide and conquer. Millions of Indians lost their life because of his policy of turning the food over to Australia and England. And so he's a villain in my play. So he cleaned him up. There's that thing called the power. There's some TV thing where Churchill comes there. Churchill hated black people. Churchill, I think, he had a troubled record in India and other places. So he cleaned him up. Then now he cleans up Warhol. That was his next thing, where Warhol is sort of like, it has an ebony and ivory ending, where they all love each other, all love each other. He puts some stuff in there that is not true. He has a woman, based on one of Basquiat's girlfriends. She comes to Basquiat's loft, has to get money because she has to have an abortion. She's been impregnated by Basquiat. They made that up. Never happened. This woman sold a refrigerator that Basquiat had scribbled all over, or painted all over, for $30,000 to Sotheby's. She had exploited him, and she can't have children, so they made that up. Yeah. So they made him as sort of like a monkey, primitive, monster, who, and Warhol was like this saint who was like really looking out for his welfare. So that's the official line. They got a couple of black people working on it. One is a Nigerian who's a director, and a black American actor. And of course, as I always say, they have black actors in Birth of a Nation. They said, well, at least they got jobs acting, but they have black actors in Birth of a Nation. So these guys are doing the film. It's going to be a film. It was on Broadway. It closed on Broadway. And now it's going to be a film. But it's very important that we talk back, that we show that we're noticing things. And I think that's what this play does. And I think you guys did a great time. You did a great job.
Richard, question, Richard?
You got terrific actors, you got a terrific director.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, I appreciate that. Did you all hear that? Yes, Richard. This is Richard May, ladies and gentlemen, actor with the African American Shakespeare Company. He played, of course, Jack Brooks.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to thank you for the Sammy Glick reference,
Yeah.
Run Sammy Run.
Yeah.
When I heard that in our rehearsal, I was like, oh wow. So that was great. Could you speak to the Oliver Gray situation at the Whitney Museum that I did that monologue on? I was very curious about that.
Well, there was like a murderous competition among the painters in New York because they were all vying to get uptown. They were all in competition to get adopted by some gallery. So I wrote a piece for Arts magazine in 1969 because some of my friends were, painters was living downtown. And I said, well, the museums are racist. You know what I mean? Because there are most other institutions in American life are racist. So why should that be an exception? I don't know, I just put it out there. Somebody it caused an uproar because all of these painters were vying to become number one, to become the top of the heap. And I had messed up because I brought racism into the discussion. One guy wrote a big old manifesto saying black is just a color. And by the end of it, he's blacker than everybody else. Mm-hmm. When the payroll showed up, everybody became black. There was a little more ambiguity when there's money involved. So I noticed that there was fierce competition among the painters. And the incident I'm talking about that you portrayed actually happened, where one of the painters called for a boycott of the museum. And a good friend of mine named Joe Street, a great painter, who set up his own gallery. He's got millions of dollars worth of painting. He started his own gallery. Now on 2nd Street, he owns half the block. He was persuaded to take his showings of his paintings out of the catalog because he wanted to go along with it. So the guy that told everybody to boycott, he betrayed them in order for him to rise.
I just want you to know, sir, that I have great deal of respect for you and your work and what you've done and your body of work. And I wanted to honor this piece. It was difficult to start with, I must tell you. I'm going to be very blunt and honest with you, as I've been with my cast and with our executive director, that this play rocked my world a little bit. Because as a director, I've directed a bunch of plays coast to coast, and I've done a bunch of stuff, and I couldn't wrap my head around putting this piece up as a theatrical play, because it doesn't have that dramatic moment in the play as Shakespeare's Act 3, where Lear is on the blown winds crack your cheeks, or Richard, or Death of a Salesman, which we'll be doing. It didn't have that, and I know that the play is worthy. I just couldn't find out where it fits in, and where do you see this? Because as our actors did, and ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause for my actors. I think they did an amazing job because they believed in this play, and they believed Jean-Michel Basquiat was wronged and all that. But do you see this play as a dramatic interpretation, or do you feel this play is you mentioned Jim Jones, and there's a wonderful play that was done. There are two plays very similar to that.
That was
Berkeley Rep, right? And also the play, the Oklahoma, where what's it called? Laramie Project, right? Right? And Jim Jones. So do you see this play as a presentational play where people are just standing and delivering?
Well, it was staged. We did Carroll staged it.
Yes, I saw the video.
Well, you mentioned the Berkeley Rep. Every black play I've seen at Berkeley Rep, I want to crawl under the seat, man. Matter of fact, I got racial profile over there. People follow you around when you go in there. I wrote an article in Alta magazine called Tale of Two Theaters. And I talked about
Tale of Two Pigs?
Tale of Two Theaters.
Two theaters, sorry.
One, I contrast the way the Black Repertory Theater, because I wouldn't be writing plays without the Black Rep. Mm-hmm. They did my first play back in 1999 around there, Hubble City. And the way the Berkeley Rep is treated. Two standards. The Black Rep has been harassed for decades by the city of Berkeley, while a lot of money has been given to the Berkeley Rep. As a matter of fact, they built two theaters. And now they're building a hotel because they feel that visiting actors, it's too expensive for them to live in Berkeley. Now the city of Berkeley is building a hotel. And the white theaters have access to the hotel, but they left the black rep out. And now the black rep is running out of its lease, and they're trying to continue. These are people who run out of the South because they did black plays. That's how they started. The Vaughns,
Yeah, I know them, yeah.
And they came to Berkeley and started out with a storefront and then a church. And finally they built a theater. And the city of Berkeley has not held its end of the bargain. It's supposed to give them $25,000 a year. There are leaks that they won't fix. As a matter of fact, there was an invasion where some people of the city government went there with a crowbar and entered the place. I mean, it's terrible. I wrote a piece about it called, Tailored to Theaters. In Alta Magazine, you can get it. Go to Alta Magazine, which is published by Willie Mercer III. As a matter of fact, they wanted to sue the magazine, but it's Mercer III. That was that. But I mean, I think that black theater is dying. We try to support black theater, but all over the country it's dying because they can't get the kind of audiences that they need to fulfill their mission. So these plays, Carla can tell you, this play, the conductor, long monologues, very difficult. Yeah. Because I believe that not only should the theater entertain, it should instruct, it should educate. And so I call my theater, the new play, a living newspaper. And what I'm doing is reviving a form from the 1930s of the WPA program, Workers' Project Administration, where playwrights were able to respond to the corporate media at the time. And that's what I'm doing, because I keep revising a play according to events. For example, the anti-affirmative action thing at Harvard, the corporate media didn't include all that because billionaires are behind that. They have sort of like a hands-off policy when it comes to billionaires. You see Trump, you see this guy today crying, Proud Boy, got 17 years, right? Yep. Crying. Yep. And Trump's still riding around his plane. Yep. Eating good, so they protect billionaires. But that was a put-up job. For example, at Harvard, I'll give you one example. At Harvard, Chinese Americans, Asian Americans support affirmative action. 70%, right? This was a put-up job of the white right. They got a couple of maybe Chinese American, one Thai student, one Chinese American student, and put them up front, but they were behind them. And so when you see the corporate media, they just had Ed Bloom, the guy that started all this. They showed him, they didn't show what Asian Americans thought about it. So I interviewed Asian Americans. I couldn't get it published here. I got it published in El País, in Spain, Spain's leading newspaper, and I put that in the play. And there's Asian American organizations who said that those kids were used as pawns by the right. So I said, well, they had to say, how do you know this? I said, on BAI. I said, I did the research. I went to the Harvard Crimson. They showed the money that was behind that effort. It was the Escape Foundation, all these right-wingers. So they did the same thing, the same crew, in San Francisco. The play I'm doing called The Conductor is about the recall of Alison Collins and Gabriela Lopez. They tried to introduce a lottery at this local high school and get away with this old rigged, scandalous testing, which is all rigged and corrupt. And the billionaires got their money together and recalled them. And they put a black face or a minority face on it, Siva Raj. Siva Raj is not even a citizen. He's a FOB. They got him, unemployed. They got him to front the thing, so it looked like they hovered in the background. So you had Arthur Rock, who's a high-tech guy. He put up $500,000. You had Bill Orpendorf, who put up $1 million. They bought the district attorney. They bought her. They said that Boudin was too lenient. Crime went down under Boudin's administration. Okay, homelessness went down. They put that up. That was propaganda. So what compelled me to write this play was that even though they were recalled, they're still being harassed. Death threats, giving me location of where their kids go to school. Alison Collins came to the house. We took them to New York. They were at the march performance, both Alison Collins and Gabriella. Lopez came to New York and they got media coverage and everything. But it started out here and spreading all over the country. So those are the kind of plays I want to do. And in order to show that we can talk back, I think one of the great, this is where I live, I think the great tragedy of the 20th century is the collapse of the black press.
True that. And two things, and I want to get questions before we go tonight, so please think of your questions, ladies and gentlemen. And you said black theater is in trouble, and I agree with that.
Yeah.
But I also want to say, and this is a selfless plug, but going on 30 years, African American Shakespeare Company is here, and we're going to be here for another 30 years if we have anything to do with it. And I really mean that. I mean, I could be anywhere in the world doing theater, and this is where I like to be because I believe in this organization and I believe in this region and I believe in the actors that we've created, that we've been working with in this, certainly in this show, but in the 15 years that I've been here. And I strongly believe in this organization. So thank you for that. But I do believe that African American Shakespeare Company is here to stay. Now, and I want to mention this before we move on to questions from the audience, because this is something that I need to know from you, sir. Our filmers, thank you guys for being here. Thank you for your time shooting this film. I mean, your time, we're paying you, but thank you for being here. But I want to, you told me, and you mentioned in the play, that Basquiat's estate refused to give permission to use his works in plays that are being done. But there's another play in New York that's being done about it, and there's this play. And I kept the wall, we were supposed to have an art installation here. We kept the wall blank here because I've asked my graphics gentleman here if we can flash photos, because this will be streamed eventually, and we want to make sure that we have some kind of visuals that are up in the background. Certainly we'll have the Baron's library, of course, but I would like to have Basquiat's paintings up. Can we do that? Because I know there's a story behind it.
His sisters have the estate, and I'm trying to get in contact with them through one of their cousins. I haven't been successful, but they're very strict about how his stuff is used.
But you know, there are a couple of books that I bought, and I mean, this production is not going to be for sale. We're not selling anything. But these books are out there that I purchased the other day off online, and I love them, and I've passed them and shared them with my cast. But is it possible for us to use photos that are in these books that we can say, when, for example, sheriff, and there's a piece.
You probably have to get permission from the publisher.
Yeah. We got to figure out something, because I'd like to have.
Like Andy Wall Foundation, those guys.
They're tough.
Oh, yeah,
I know.
What could possibly be their
Purpose?
aversion to you using the art?
Because they're not getting money for it.
Oh.
They're not getting money for it.
They just want, okay, so they know that there's work out.
Yeah.
They know that there are plays, and his work is in these. I just saw an exhibit down in Los Angeles with Basquiat, and it was well received. But if it's public domain, I mean, if the public has access, why would they not want to allow you to use the work to promote the show?
Well, there's been a scandal recently where people do fake Basquiats.
And you mentioned that in the play, right? Schnabel, right?
Well, but I mean, even more recent than that.
Okay.
There was a scandal where people were selling fake Basquiats.
So they just say a flat no to try and dissuade.
Well, I think probably if you ask these publishers permission, they can lead you to that.
I would like to. I think because I would love to be able to, once our editors to project on this white wall. Wouldn't it be lovely to see that when the forensic artists, beautifully played by Devin Sullivan and of course Rezan Ewan, that we see these images projected on the screen, even images of Schnabel, of the people that we speak about. I mean, it's fascinating to see if we can just make that happen. The great jazz artists that are mentioned, in the play, to see their name, to see Charlie Parker's face, to see Louis Armstrong's face, to see, you know what I mean, just to remind us that these were the visionaries, these were the artists, these were the people that made us, that tread the path that we follow today. So I will be following up on that because I need to know that because I'm going to have this incredible team put something together for us. So ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to take up more of your time, but certainly our playwrights. And if you have any questions, please throw them out to us, and we'll anything at all. Actors at all? Yes, question. Yes, Marcus Shelby, ladies and gentlemen.
I don't have a question, but I just want to thank you, Mr. Reed, for this work.
Sure, thank you.
I'm a big fan of your work.
Thank you.
And I like all the references of Black music that you always include in your work, that you keep reminding us, kind of how it's all interconnected. It reminds me of the beautiful book written by William Rodin, The $30 Million Slave, and how a lot of the athletes suffered the same sort of being used, much like Basquiat did by white culture, getting credit, and it starts way back into the mid 19th century. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Marcus. Anybody else, please? Yes, Rezan.
Hi, I also want to thank you for this play. What was really, so this is about Basquiat specifically and Warhol, but for me, it was also about how human beings treat human beings, or can treat human beings, and that's just, it needs to be, it can be terrible. And I'm thankful to be, to have read that you wrote this. And I have a question about a line in here, if I could. There's this line where I'm telling Grace about the demands of, that part talks about Basquiat, Michael Jackson, and Prince, about so you don't miss a note, you miss a lyric or a deadline, and then I get that phone call from the detective, and I say I gotta go, and then Grace says she might put a deadline on us. Was that, when the way that I received that, I was like, I cannot believe she just said that about, I was like, are you kidding me? Was that the intention?
That was not intentional.
Oh, okay, I was like, that was not the intention.
Well, I'll use that. That's good.
That's what I think. Okay.
What did you mean?
That was an accident, actually. Originally, Jennifer Gray was also played by the character. And we never let her go change constantly. So we had to take her out.
Oh, okay.
And forgive me, in using this young lady as Raksha, Rezan is from East Africa, and I changed Indian to East African. Without your permission, sir, and I should say oops, but I could not. It just made sense, and also Beta was changed to, and I cannot pronounce it. Would you say it for me? Yeah. Which is from an East African, and I thought that's more.
Well, he was influenced by African art.
Yeah. So to have her say that, I thought it maked sense, and I should have asked you your permission.
And Haitian art.
And Haitian art as well. Yeah.
Pretty sure that they ignored that.
Lovely. Anyone else, please? Before
Just
yes.
a quick question. Throughout so much of this work, you see the
crown.
And you are such a wealth of knowledge and history. What does that crown mean?
I think he used that during the graffiti period.
I'm sorry.
He used it during the graffiti period.
I really don't know what it said.
But it shows up in so many different pieces.
Well, I think it has to do with, if I may dare or deign interpret it, it seems like it would be the black man is king, that we are, that is, yes, Raksha says in the first time she enters the stage, she said, angry black man, right? But I think, Brother Reed also mentions that Basquiat knew a lot about African culture, and he strongly believed in the African man and the black man. I think he just constantly meant, yes, we are angry, yes, we are abused, yes, we are arrested wrongly, yes, we are, but we are the king. We are kings, and we should be treated as kings throughout.
He refused to be toned down.
That's correct.
That's a problem that a lot of black artists run into.
Yeah.
You know, they don't, they're not passive.
And no matter what kind of drugs, what kind of where his headspace was, as you look at his pieces, it's angry, it's physical. Nothing is shaped in any way. It's just there, and you look at it and you feel it. But there's a crown someplace in it, and there's also messages throughout, whether it's misspelled, or whether it's in Greek, whatever it is. It's the writings throughout his piece. So he was. Not only was he, and he used color in a way that Picasso uses color, or certainly,
He didn't get demonized.
No, neither did Pollock. And I told my actors, and there's a story, a documentary on Netflix right now, and it's called, I forgot what it was called. I saw it, and you mentioned it in your play about the Chinese artist who created a major, like Rothkos and Pollocks, and sold them for millions and millions of dollars. It's on Netflix right now. You can find it on Netflix. It's an amazing story.
There's also an excellent piece of Basquiat that's streaming. I don't know
what platform it is. Yeah,
I'm not sure. You can search it, but it's there. Excellent piece of.
Anything else before we close out tonight? We're almost at 10 o'clock. I don't want to keep you guys here much longer.
I want to pose with the actors and the director. Is that possible?
You want to do what? Yes, please.
Take a picture?
I would love that. Thank you all very much for being here. We'll keep Ishmael reading for another 2 minutes. Actors, please. Stefan, if you're here, please could you thank you to my darling. And let's get a photo with the actors, please. And Sherry, please, if you would join us. Yes. Look at you. You're a fan.
Thank you.
I'm gonna have these chrome nails on the drinkers.
All right, let's do this. Thank you, brother. You want a chair? Or you want to stand up?
No, I'm standing up.
You stand up, but you're so tall now.
I think it's where we should sit right here.
Yeah, I think
I think you should sit right here.
Okay.
Some right in front of me. That's good. You want to take as many as you wish. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ishmael. Thank you. Thank you so much. God bless you. Thank you.